Well, it's very fun to have everyone here, and I appreciate you all coming and spending some time. I'm going to talk about some things that lots of you have already heard and seen bits and pieces of, but maybe you'll get something else tonight that you haven't seen, or just a reminder. One of the things that I think is important about this is that we remember that this is really pretty basic. You know, we're not trying to do something dramatic here. There's lots of little things that we can do that can change some of this reactivity issue. And, you know, we've talked about this before, the labeling of aggression and how that changes how people perceive dogs. We've talked about how highly emotional the responses are from people when they, you know, see a reactive dog. And all of these kinds of things really come down to this, what I call, and Robin talks about this too, this double standard. You know, we react so aggressively when people challenge us, and yet we have this expectation that dogs completely remain neutral in every situation, and it's not so realistic. So one of the things that I want to really have people get a hold of and talk to your clients about, because this is so important, I think. You know, reactivity happens in a moment in time to a specific trigger. It's not a constant, and it's not a state of being. And unfortunately, people with reactive dogs, they kind of they start to treat their dog as if that's all there is, that's all they see. And it's so important, I think, for us to help them see their dogs in a slightly different way, see the other parts of their dogs. So we know that this is so often fear-based. And you know, we can talk about all the different reasons that dogs become reactive. Some of it is just, you know, poor socialization or over-socialization. I'm starting to believe that that's a problem now too, where people take their dogs out and thrust them into society, if you will, in ways that are completely overwhelming. But one of the biggest problems I see is this third category here. You know, people see things on television, and we don't need to talk about it a whole lot, but this aversive handling that starts to happen in response to a reaction. And I think that's where we get into trouble, and this is something where we can really make a difference in terms of helping people understand what reactions really are, that it's fear-based, and that we can change the way dogs feel about things. So really simple things that we have to do to start. The whole point here is to reduce arousal, right? We're trying to lower arousal so that a dog can be in a more thinking, coping way. We have to get the pressure off the neck, and you'll still go out and about and you'll see dogs, all sorts of dogs in public with, you know, tight leashes, tight things on their necks, from choke chains to prong collars to just everything. And the person then pulling back on the leash when a reaction happens, and of course this just increases the problem. So one of the things, of course, that we have to do is we really have to allow the dog to move away or increase the space between the scary thing. And here's an analogy. I just thought about this afternoon, because one of the things that's out there right now, and has been for years, is this concept of you should have your dog look at you. You know, people go out in public, a situation is arising, they want their dog to sit and stare at them. Now, just think about this. How about if you and your friend, let's say you went to a concert, and it gets out late at night, you and your friend have to walk to your car, a little sketchy area of town possibly, and you see a group of not very friendly folks coming towards you. And your friend says, well, let's just sit down on the curb and stare at each other and wait till they pass by. Now, nobody would do this, right? Absolutely nobody would take that choice. So asking our dogs to do it doesn't make any more sense to me at all, when in fact what we need to allow them to do is to move. And the other piece of this that I see is, again, people shoving food into their dogs' faces in the moment of the scary thing. I'm not so sure this is really helpful either. And when we go through the exercises that we're going to go through, food may not be the best option. Food is an arousing experience for some dogs in itself, but again, we really want the dog to process what's happening, to be in the experience and learn from it, as opposed to just thinking about food. So we'll get on to that a little bit. So I wanted to show this picture because I thought this person captured this picture beautifully. Look at this poor dog when the leash tightened on his neck. I mean, it's just so obvious that this dog cannot possibly feel safe in this moment with that kind of pressure on the leash. So what are we trying to do here? We're just simply trying to allow dogs to feel safe in the presence of things that cause them some concern. And they can't feel safe until they can trust us, and they can't learn new coping skills until they can be in that environment or be in that situation in a reduced state of arousal. In other words, as we talk about in T-Touch, until they're in a state of balance. So space is so critical, and having a choice is so critical. Those are the two things, and they're really not complicated at all. Yet we see other techniques where the dog doesn't have a choice to leave, where he's kind of trapped and stuck, and then the scary thing comes toward him. I've never thought this was very fair at all. This never made a lot of sense to me. So we're going to do this slightly differently, of course. And I just wanted to put, again, a picture of a half butterfly in there to see the difference between, this was a shelter dog. This dog was worried about people, worried about all sorts of things. But just giving him that much difference in space with a loose leash and no pressure on the neck, and the stress isn't as great. So I just wanted to, again, capture a picture that shows some of that. So here's the whole thing that we're trying to do right here. We just want the dog to feel safe, relaxed, and in control while in the presence of these other dogs or people, or it can be anything really. And that's how the dog learns to feel more confident, because that's really what we're trying to do here as well, is we're building the dog's confidence to cope with some of these things. So I really like the stuffy exercises now, and we were just in Portland not that long ago, and Dawn was there, and we used the stuffies a lot, very successfully. And I think that using the stuffies can be incredibly predictive of exactly what a dog might do in a situation. There's two things that happen here for me though. When somebody has a reactive dog, they never get to really meet. The person is worried, they're holding them back, and you create all this leash reactivity. And one of the advantages of a stuffy is that they actually can go forward towards it and investigate. So we want to do this in a way, of course, in all the years that I've been doing this, I've really only had one dog that tore the stuffy to pieces in 30 seconds. And that was a learning experience in itself, because then you really knew what you were working with. But in general, sometimes they approach too quickly and they approach a little bit too aroused. But if we can allow them to do that without putting pressure on the leash, then we can see, well, what are they really going to do? And they can get to the stuffy and realize that nothing bad happened. And that's the difference between a stuffy and, a real dog or something. But we have to do this in a sequence of steps, just like we do everything with T-Touch. We break it down into smaller bits. And as most of you know too, the look and the type of the stuffy do matter. I usually start with a small one that's not necessarily black and all one color. And then I work up to a medium size and then a larger dog. So we want to lay it down first and head facing away. Of course, stuffies cannot give any signals back. So if we have it directly staring at the dog right away, we've already put ourselves in a bad situation. So we can go through this sequence of steps, and we had a dog in England that I'll show you the pictures of, that really helped with this, to see the steps. Now, if the dog is too aroused or too fearful, I might have to use food. I don't want the dog to be afraid of the stuffy, and often that's the case. When we start doing these exercises, I think it shows really easily the difference between a dog being excited and being fearful of the stuffy. A lot of dogs don't even want to approach it. So then I might have to use a treat or two to get the dog to come up and realize it's nothing to be afraid of. So let's look at this little dog. Let's see. This was a dog from England. And this little dog, if this dog saw another dog from 200 yards away, it screamed like bloody murder, just screamed. It was really something. And so it even happened with the stuffy at first, but we started out and the dog was actually really, really fearful of the stuffy. So you can see how we've had it lying down. It did come over the top of it at first. And so what I actually did is I put a treat on the dog and I let him eat the treat off of the stuffy. Now, this is not going to train a dog to go up to other dogs and look for cookies. I mean, that's what people always ask me. And I'm like, no, it doesn't really happen that way. Not that I've ever noticed anyway. But what it does do is say, come up here, look at this. It's not so frightening. So we had to work up to this point. This dog did not want to get anywhere near the stuffy at first, and we just went slowly with it and kept kind of enticing it. Here's another picture. This one was helpful because you can see the boxer's pretty aroused. You can see his ears and his tail, and he was charging in pretty good. And I just asked the person to just let it be and stay pretty neutral. And when he got there, as is typical of boxers, they kind of come in with a big old bravado, and he got there and he actually was pretty appropriate, sniffing as if it was just another dog. So let's go back to our little screamer here. And we work through all of the sequence of steps of the stuffy lying down, standing up, facing it without it moving. So the next process in the stuffy exercises is to now maybe move it a little bit. And this is where I have to caution people because sometimes they get too exuberant and they want to pretend, make it look like it's a real dog. And that's not what we're trying to do at all. We just want to be calm about this. So you can see at first in the top picture, still a little concerned. So I moved the stuffy away. I turned the head away again. As we work through this exercise, I mean, this was really quite successful. You can see how we got down to the bottom picture there on the left, and he's started to be able to look at it and look away. And that's exactly what we're trying to get to happen, is the dog to start literally giving it some signals. And by the end of this exercise, look at how nicely he's just standing there quietly in balance and ignoring it. And to me, that's the real successful piece. If the dog is willing to just walk by or stand close and ignore it, that to me is the perfect outcome. So as you noticed in those other pictures, we were using the confidence course a little bit. We were moving. So one of the things that I think is so critical is that we have this movement and these moments of standing in physical balance, just to allow the dog to look, take it in, make an assessment that there really is no danger, and then be able to realize that, oh, I can cope with this, I can do this. But we've got to have some purposeful movement. In other words, the confidence course. Without this, a lot of this work would be so much more difficult. I've seen over and over again people just trying to bring two dogs together in a space without anything else to do. And this is what T-Touch brought to us that made this process so much more reasonable in terms of having them engaged in something more more interesting than the other dog. So we've gone through this reactivity exercise many times in many courses, and every time I feel like, even if it's not 100% successful in the sense that the other dog might still have a reaction or two, I've seen so much progress with it that it's well worth using it and working with it. It's hard sometimes to find the neutral dog, and you have to be really careful about using the neutral dog too much. There's usually one in every workshop that works quite well. I just had a workshop in Florida, and there was a little cattle dog there that was just perfect for it. And some dogs are really good at it, and other dogs aren't so good at it. So we want to start with one, if we can, that is good at it. And even if you don't have that perfect dog, these exercises are still possible. You just have to have a little greater space usually. And I think most of you realize this, and I think it's important for us to help our clients realize this. Dogs do not have to meet and greet. They don't have to be friends with every other dog. And in fact, if you have a dog that's fearful and tends to be reactive, this is the worst situation to try to put them in over and over again. It's really more important that they simply are able to look away, not feel threatened, and go on about their business. So the sequence of steps that we've kind of used and started to develop as a pattern here is following at a just decent distance in a large circle, and establishing this distance sometimes is a little, takes a little experience and skill. Often, some dogs get right into it and other dogs take a much bigger space, and that's okay. That's why we do this outside frequently. It works better outside, I think. And you can always stop. You don't have to go to each step. And often we have stopped. We've done a little bit of this and we let it be, and we can come back to it another day and work again, or even another later on in a session. So we have this perfect video, perfect picture sequence up at Robin's. This was actually several years ago now, but it really illustrates. It's so good. I can't remember the dog's name now, Robin. Oh, what was the dog's name? Anyway.
The Black Shepherd.
The Black Shepherd. I can't remember his name.
No.
So this was an interesting case because this woman had developed, she had a management, she had a management tool. And that was, if this dog had a toy or a ball in its mouth, it could function. It could function around other dogs because the ball was, I don't know, it was just obsessed with it actually. But the problem was he was still really aroused. The ball was really arousing. So she hadn't really done anything to help the dog come down and be able to just cope. So that's what we were trying to do here. And we were really lucky in this because we had two really neutral dogs, like really, really mellow neutral dogs to work with. So you can see we started outside and we're walking in a circle actually in the arena, and that dog is in the back. So then we started working with the labyrinth, and as you can see, we're using a large labyrinth set up for horses, which was good in this scenario. And you can see that Lori is leading her dog out of the labyrinth as the reactive dog is coming in. So then we started to get this a little bit closer, and if you look at these pictures, you can still see some arousal there. You see the ears, probably was staring just a little bit too long, but that's okay. We kind of kept working with it. The dog wasn't barking, wasn't going off or anything like that. And then you can see we got a little bit closer, and I put myself in between the two dogs. Sometimes you just have to time where you stand so that there won't be prolonged eye contact. We're kind of trying to avoid that at this stage of the game here. So now we got to the point where we could both be in the labyrinth and both dogs were looking away. There started to be a lot of this looking away. And you can see that the shepherd's tail's down, relaxed a little bit more. Nice loose leashes on everybody's part. It's looking really good here. So here was another workshop that we're working with the boxer. And, I want to make the point that the dog doesn't have to be reactive to use this exercise. It can just be overstimulated, over-aroused. It can be anything that just is new and causes the dog to get overexcited about it. Same concept. And this boxer, typical boxer, was pretty excited about everything. So we had already worked through the first steps, and now we're walking in parallel, and we're at this distance. We got a little bit closer, and again, I also want to make the point that these pictures are from past workshops before we were using the harness, the handles and the leashes, but same concept in terms of the exercise. So here was a great picture sequence because the person was taking pictures really frequently. And it's so important that the dog gets to look. This asking them to never look, to look away constantly, I think it's just frustration on their part if they don't get to take a look. Like I said, I'm not going to sit on the curb while the scary people come towards me without looking at them. So the boxer took a look here. And then this is what we're looking for. In the very next moment, a nice big calming signal, which as we know, these are social signals that say, hey, you know what, I'm not a threat, I don't want you to be a threat. And when the dog starts giving these signals, and I really honestly feel that another dog teaches these signals or gives these signals better than we can. So the boxer really started to get the hang of it. Now in this same workshop, we were really lucky because we had done all this nice work outside, and the house happened to be on a cul-de-sac. So we decided, well, let's take this into the real world and let's take it out onto the street. And we started working with dogs in the cul-de-sac, passing one another. And it went really quite well. And then we put another dog standing in a driveway, because this is a real life scenario, right? Walking your dog down the sidewalk past another dog in a driveway or in a yard. And you can see the calming signal. You can see the dog's tongue there if you look carefully enough. It just went really well. It was a great opportunity to put it into real life, especially for the folks in the workshop. So I feel that success comes if we can simply have the dog stay neutral, low arousal, not exhibiting, reactive behavior. And more importantly, can they stand for just a few moments in balance in the presence of the other dog and to be able to move on? I think if most people had this much with a reactive dog that they've been living with, they'd be really happy. And that's what I want to set them up for. I want them to set them up for this expectation, not the expectation that their dog would then go to the dog park and play with all the other dogs and have a grand old time. That's just not going to be entirely realistic. So here's a couple videos taken from another workshop, and I'll just kind of talk you through these a little bit. And again, this was just a 2-day workshop, and I want to point out that these people had not used harnesses before. They'd not used 2 points of contacts before, and this was accomplished in a 2-day workshop. So it's doable here. So this is the reactive dog, is the little one here, and from the owner's perspective, this little dog could not be around any other dogs without just barking, and really getting upset about it. And here's our neutral dog, the little rescue pit bull. How about that? So as you watch these guys, I like this video because there's some great calming signals, even if the handlers might be pulling on the leash a little bit. But as you watch how we're going around in the circle, and the little dog's noticing, and look at the pitty over there. She's sniffing the ground, she's turning away, and I even slowed this down. You can see the little one look away and the pitty sniffing the ground. These signals are subtle, but they're happening all the time. So then we were able to move this into walking parallel, and we're fairly close right now, actually, and the little dog's doing quite well. But we've done all this other work. We've taken pressure off the neck. Now watch this pitty. She's amazing. She's doing everything she can to make herself less threatening. The little dog had a moment there, but I just asked them to just move away. And again, the signaling that's going on between these dogs is really pretty fun. So again, I stepped in there on purpose right there because there was a moment of looking around a little bit too long. Man, I wish I could have brought this little pitty home. She was great. And you see, it's just this slow, controlled, quiet, calm, neutral environment that allows this process to happen with no pressure on the leash. So that one went really well. And here's another dog.
In this session, we're working with Mickey the Labradoodle, and once again using Daisy the pit bull as...
So Mickey was one of those Labradoodles that gets really excited about everything. And I swear this woman has told us that she has never been able to walk her dog with another dog or past another dog without him just going crazy. So we're already a lot further along, but we changed a lot of things. So again, you can see the signaling going on back and forth between the two dogs. And the handlers were just doing a really great job. These moments of pausing and just standing quietly in balance are so important. Now you can see that Mickey over there is getting a little nervous. You see him have a big shake off. He wanted to kind of move and stand behind her. But all of that's a whole lot better than lunging and barking at the back of the leash, on the leash. So now we did the walk past. And mostly Nicky just ignored him. He just ignored the little pitty. And we walked past again. There was a lip link there, if you saw that, and just a turn away. And this woman, I'm telling you, this woman was so excited about that. Look, she's got the big fist pump and everything. She was so excited about just that much happening. Now, what's important to have people understand is that you have to work with these exercises a bit. Like, she couldn't now just go out on the street right after this workshop and think that without any kind of, setup, that it was all going to go perfectly. Although actually she did tell me that it went quite well. But I think people need to understand that the dogs need some of these experiences, maybe not, over and over and over again, but they need this experience with a few other dogs before you go out onto the street and just hope for the best. And that's one of the things that owners kind of forget about. They just want to go out for their walks and not set some of these things up. But I encourage my clients to set their dog up with known dogs under known circumstances, so you can control the variables for a while and let them practice their new skills. So I've used this exercise with all sorts of moving objects: bicycles, lawnmowers, skateboards, horses. I love doing it with my horses and dogs because it's so out of context for the dog, and it has worked for me really beautifully because the horse is never going to bark back. And if you have really mellow horses that don't get too worried about the dog barking at all, it works really well. But you can do it with anything. So here's where we rub. Here's the rub: working with the clients. And again, owners have this outdated idea of methods and things they've seen on television, and we really have to help them understand why those techniques are not so helpful in terms of helping their dogs feel safe, and even just helping them see that these are fearful responses as opposed to aggressive responses. I think the other thing that we can do is point out all the subtle signals that we see. I think most people miss a lot of the small things, little tiny changes, and then help them understand, how do we help our dog feel safe so that they can then start to show new coping skills. And again, I talk about this. We've got to get rid of this look at me, look at me, look at me thing when, the dog really just wants to look at what's coming at them that's scary and move away from it. Those are so critical. And it's hard with clients sometimes. They're so used to holding really tight. They're so used to getting tense themselves. So anything that we could do body wraps with the client as well as the dog. We could do a little bit of touch with the client. We can do some things to help the client relax as well. And what I've found is that doing the stuffy exercises gives the client a whole different picture often about what's possible for their dog. So, really, I think all we're trying to do here is help dogs feel safe, have them have the experience of feeling relaxed and calm as we introduce some of these things. I see this work as very different from what they call desensitization. I don't think the two things are exactly the same, because we're asking the dogs to have an experience. And we're doing lots of processing, movement, balance. All of this comes into play. I see it differently as just repeated exposure. And maybe that's a subtlety, but I often have people ask, what's the difference between this and desensitization, or whatever the word is, repeated exposure. I think this is a slightly different experience, because I think we really are shifting the nervous system in a way that repeated exposure doesn't do if they don't do something about the arousal in the first place, if that makes sense to everybody. And to me, I've just seen this work so many times. Now, what I haven't put on here, as I don't have a lot of video of it because I'm always the one doing it usually, but let's talk a little bit about working with dogs that are reactive to people. And that's where we have to bring in some of the other tools that we know, like that Robin was introducing, the beeline, and some things that we do at a distance. I don't think it's really that much different than working with another dog, but the person has to be fairly neutral. And this is where we sometimes do need to use some food. We need to make ourselves seem more enticing and less threatening, but we have to be careful about how we do that. What I like to do is work through the confidence course in the beeline, and each time we stop to come into balance is either throw a little piece of food at first or offer a little piece of food until the dog starts to feel like, oh, that's not so bad. And this is not where touching in the beginning is really advisable. I think one of the things that helps these dogs feel safe is that we don't put our hands on them initially, is that we let them have the experience of us moving toward us, moving away from us, being with us, walking with us, without us trying to touch them, because I think that's one of the things that has caused some problems for them in the past in terms of people initially, getting too close, getting their hands on them. And touching can come. It can certainly come, but I think it has to be a little bit more on the dog's terms, if that makes sense to everybody. So we'll open this up for questions, but I just wanted to put this little guy up because this is the most mellow dog I think I've ever seen in my life. So if you can't fix your reactive dog, just go get a Basset Hound.
Good one. Very good. So thanks, Kathy. I have a couple of things that I thought about that I wanted to just,
okay.
One of them is that for sure you can, if you're working with dog reactive dogs, teaching the owners to do some touch as part of the element work is very different than with a dog that's people reactive, but it's something that you could really combine them with. I sometimes have found that if I put just the rear end of the stuffy out for some dogs, it's actually it can be sort of less for them. And I was thinking about that black dog because do you remember we used Roy after, and we had the black, she was off leash with her toy because Roy couldn't care less about toys. And he just completely ignored her. But it was, I think, one of her first experiences with dogs that didn't react to her. So it was quite interesting. And when you were saying that about not just working with reactive dogs, this exercise, it's, Kathy's so right. Like if you have a same dog family, for instance, and I've seen this over and over again where a person, maybe they had a multi-dog home and they thought that one dog was creating all the problems. And when you do this exercise with two dogs that know each other, sometimes you actually see that the dog that you thought wasn't the instigator is totally the instigator of it. And it can completely change actually how you actually respond to the dogs. It's just like kids at home, one that's always getting in trouble when it's actually the other one that's goading them. So that can be really helpful. And of course, the groundwork, the elements of it, just as you say, give them new experiences. Plus, they give them something to focus on that's not just the other dog. So it makes them feel safer that they have a task, especially if it's not too difficult for them.
And Robin, I should mention too, like we've been doing where we started to put some scent things into the groundwork as well, where we put this gal at Calgary brought in little containers of things and we just set it on the groundwork area so that dogs could come in and sniff as well. It was another great way to, decrease arousal in terms of that physical tension and let dogs engage mentally.
Yeah. And you could take little metal tins and just poke holes in them. I did a whole bunch of like little mint tins and then put different smells. But if you go to a hunting store, you can get drops essence of like deer and all sorts of different animals. And you can also use that kind of thing in sort of just to give them just new sensory experiences that make a huge difference. And then what Kathy was saying about people reactive dogs, I think that this idea of us remaining neutral so that the dogs know we won't touch them is huge, because dogs so often, especially if they kind of seem like they're a little bit nervous, but they're a little friendly, the more neutral you can be initially with them so they realize they can look at you and you're not going to be staring back at them.
Right.
I think that's
in all honesty,
important.
Robin and everyone, I have done this exercise with a lot of reactive dogs, and reactive dogs to people. And in all these years, I've really only come across maybe 2 or 3 dogs that I was never, ever going to really touch or interact with. Even, so even when at first it looks like, oh my God, how am I ever going to work with that dog? It's very possible to go very slowly and get to that point, but it was always on the dog's terms initially. So even when dogs look like, oh, I don't want to get anywhere near that, you don't have to feel that there's not a possibility that they will come around. Really, only 2 or 3 in all these years that I wasn't going to touch. The one in Germany, Robin.
Yeah, I agree on that one. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So does anybody have any, if you have either a question, you can either put up your hand and I can let you speak if you want to speak, or you can unmute yourself, I think, or you can write it down in the question and answer. They're all very quiet. Oh, Violet.
No, I was, as you were talking about this, I was just thinking about like the whole freeze state and the fight flight state and so on, and from last week. And I've just between last week and this week read some more interesting stuff, which is that when an animal or a person goes into either fight, flight, or freeze, the way we hear things changes. Our inner ear muscles work differently. So we don't hear the middle range sounds, right? We hear high and low volume sounds, so they may not hear our voice and may respond to us differently. They smell things, we smell differently, we taste differently, we see differently when we're in those states, and it's not something that we choose to go into. Basically, the body takes over. Wow. The nervous system takes over when something is too overwhelming or too arousing or too scary, and just switches into one of the either fight, flight, or the other nervous system. Wow. So what you're doing is helping them come back into the state where they can actually be interactive, and that whole thing of help them be a thinking animal is, truly is coming back into that newer branch of the parasympathetic nervous system, which actually is the interactive one that has social engagement and that hears and responds normally again.
Well, that actually makes perfect sense.
That's why the movement is so critical. Yeah. That slow, purposeful movement is what does that.
Well, and of course, think about it. When the owners get in that state of fear and they're afraid of what their dog's going to do, how often can't they follow your directions? So if you, and it probably has to do with that really basic primitive state. Interesting. Cool. Yeah. So anybody else? Anybody else? Nobody else.
Oh no, this was either really boring or people are like, hey, yeah, I get it.
No, they're always quiet. They're having wait time and they're thinking about it, actually, I think. All right. So, well, if you think of questions later or you have some other comments that you'd like to make, you can send them to us. Oh, goody, question. What's the biggest distance you had to begin with? Oh, wow. Yeah. So what's the biggest distance you had to begin with?
A couple of football fields for sure.
Yeah.
A couple 100 yards.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
And let me make this point too, Robin, because and everybody, there's a lot of stuff out there that now people are getting all freaked out if you get your dog quote unquote over threshold, right? And that you should never let your dog have a moment of stress, and that is not realistic. It's not realistic. So I have to say that there are some times in some of these exercises I could have put up a couple more videos in which there was a reaction, and my thought is that you just increase the space and you go on. And if everybody remains neutral and everybody remains calm, the dog kind of says, oh, okay, well, I guess that wasn't such a big deal. And I don't think it's realistic that we would expect there to set it up where there's never, a bit of a reaction. Look at all of us in our lives. We have plenty of reactions and we manage to come back down and learn from it and go on. And I think, that's a part of this. You have to be smart about what that distance is, and you have to know when to stop, and shorter is always better for sure. But it's okay to me if I'm not going to stop this exercise if I get a little bit of a bark or a little bit of a jump, and I'm going to just figure it out and move away further and try to get back to where we can.
Yeah, no, I agree, because I think it's about recovery rate. And I mean, obviously you don't want to leave your dog in a state of arousal, constant arousal, but so if they bark and you move them away and you carry on with something, can they recover? And everybody has to learn that possibility of recovery. And the reality is, unless you wrap them in cotton wool and never take them out anywhere, you're going to get a reaction sometime. And I don't care who it is. And all it does is make people feel guilty if you say, oh, you should never go over threshold. Well, you know what? If you do go over it, you've been on the edge for a while, and you need to back up and do something else. But Kathy, one of the statements that you often make, and I always say this to people, is whenever, and this is not just with dogs, but whenever you think, well, this is going really well, let's just do it once more. That's when you need to stop.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter whether it's riding or whatever it is, because it's that's usually the time when you do get into trouble, because it was a little bit like the dog in the video that you showed with the woman, the little dog, and he was interested in the pity, and so she kind of let the dog start to go over too much instead of just casually just saying, hey, you know, let's go. And you did that for them, you know. Right. So yeah, so Janet says to everybody, it's been really good. I'm sitting here watching all the calming signals in my 4 dogs trying to sit next to me on the couch. Cool. Cool. Oops, another question. Oh, so what do you describe to participants as the next step post-class, especially when they want, to take their, be able to take their dogs to run loose and interact with other dogs? How about don't?
Well, I really spend a lot of time talking about this because, again, I think sometimes the expectations are so unrealistic with owners. And, you know, everybody wants to have the great little dog they can take everywhere and go and do, but that's not life. That's not real life. A lot of these dogs come out of shelters. They've come out of really rough beginnings, and they don't really want to go to the dang dog park. They don't really want to go to Costco. They don't want to go all these places sometimes. And I think people have to pick and choose and really watch their dogs. And this is even true for those of us that have dogs that aren't reactive, that we take a lot of different places. Sometimes if we're paying more attention, we might actually see that, wow, this isn't that fun for the dog. So I often talk about setting up smaller situations with known dogs. Same thing for the whole dog park thing. Set up known situations with known dogs and practice some of this. And your dog can still get the interactions. They can still have some time out, but you have more control of the variables. And in the end run, you know, you want your dog to be successful. You want them to have had a good experience. And I think if people would set that up with friends, or, you know, I've even done that. I've combined clients. I know, like, I have 2 or 3 different clients, and I say, okay, let's do a little group thing, and they come all at the same time, and we practice this with slightly different dogs, but, you know, we're controlling the variables.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing is, some nose work classes are really great for dogs, or doing brain games, things that allow their dog to actually do something the dog might like to do, and not just what the person wants them to like to do.
And I also talk to people about, you know, how arousing is your household? How chaotic and crazy is your own household in terms of how much stress the dog is having on a day-to-day basis? Because some households are a little out of control in terms of kids and other dogs, and get people thinking about quiet time for their dogs. You know, quiet time where we just do a little body work, a little T-touch, or we do a little nose work. We do some things that are less intense on a regular daily basis, so the dog has downtime.
Yeah. So anybody else have any questions? Good questions.
Just a comment is just, I think about all of this in the context of horses, and it translates so well into horses as well. Just the interactions, what's enough for the horse, what's too much for a horse, all those things. It's great. Perfect.
Thanks. Well, thank you, Kathy. Now, I know that you've been drinking a lot of beer while we've been on the call, but yeah. So,
well, it is almost beer time now, I have to be honest.